I'm meteorologist Jason Caterina on AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Destination Retirement with Robert Kuhn. Tune in Sunday mornings from 11 to 12 for Destination Retirement with Robert Kuhn, sponsored by Kuhn Capital Partners in Oak Brook.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. I've been meaning to get to this story for a while, but other events intercede. You want to talk about a great case study that everything the identitarian left touches, it literally turns into sewage? The ecological disaster in the Potomac. 240 million gallons of sewage spilled into that river. President Trump has declared it a emergency. Now, of course, the same identitarian left is currently holding FEMA funding hostage over Trump's enforcement of federal immigration law. The layers of this. And as we look into the executives in charge of the D.C. water infrastructure, what do we find? What do you think we find? A repeat of what we saw with respect to the executives in the greater Los Angeles area, Pacific Palisades to be more specific, both in the fire department as well as in water management. What's the emphasis? Well, don't let me put it in my words. Let's hear from D.C. Water Manager David Gaddis.
When I arrived at D.C. Water, this was an organization that looked very similar to our industry. It was predominantly, white male at the top, but this is a utility that's, more than 70% people of color work at this utility. And I really believe, and I still believe, and it has been fantastic. The outcomes have been fantastic, but the people at the top, the executives, the chiefs in that C-suite, they should look like the employees that they serve and that they work with. And the same thing with the community. And so my executive team, looks exactly like the community. It looks like the employees, the staff, be it people of color, women, men. And it's just a fantastic team that has come together to do a lot of great things here at DC Water and in the community for the customers.
Would you like to revise and extend your remarks, Mr. Gaddis? Morris Hughes is the chair of D.C. Water. Again, we're talking about the worst sewage spill in American history, just by the way.
Now, and this is the chain breaking, institutional barrier, disruption work that I'm doing. Now I'm on a mission to make sure Black and brown kids have experience in the workplace. So then when they're competing in the market,
that's one less check.
And the playing field is leveled because now they got the internship, the same one for the parent who knew the president of the corporation. Now the playing field is level, but that
Yeah, I'm happy to report that the DC Water staff is 82% BIPOC. I'm saddened to report that they presided over the worst sewage spill in a waterway in American history. And the point is not the distribution of race or ethnicity, of course. The point is that I don't care. I don't care if it's 100% black or 100% white. What I do care about is it's people that know what they're doing. Pretty straightforward. For more on this and other matters of environmental policy and common sense, Bjorn Lomberg joins us, president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank, author of Best Things First. Bjorn, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan. Good to be back.
So, I mean, we talk about the disposition of these individuals that are in charge of making environmental policy, managing important public infrastructure. And, I mean, the people that engage in the fear mongering over, say, climate change, and the people that are obsessed with, counting by race and other non behavioral characteristics, the Venn diagram of those two groups is a perfect circle.
I can certainly imagine that. It's not my main expertise, but surely what we've seen is that there's a lot of people, especially in the climate community, but also in general in the environmental movement, who are very well intentioned, but very often feel the need to say, no, it should be particular targets we should reach, rather than talk about what can you actually do that costs little and do a lot before you do something that costs a lot and does a little. And unfortunately, we often end up with really poor, ineffective climate and environmental policies because we don't think, just like any other part of the society needs to do, we have limited resources. We need to do the best we can.
Yeah, I think, to borrow from a quote attributed to Samuel Johnson, the road to a 240 million gallon sewage spill is paved with good intentions.
Yes, and again, I'm sorry. I live in Europe.
I get it.
Sewage spill, but there's a lot of things that we have done in the past, and again, if you look at climate, which has now cost the world more than $16 trillion in actual cost. Forgetting all the sort of secondary effects that are probably much larger in lost growth opportunity, $16 trillion. And yet, last year, the world still had the largest emissions of fossil fuel CO2 because we're focusing on the wrong things. We're focusing very much on rich people cutting a little bit of their emissions, which, of course, makes people feel good. But this is not what counts. What counts is that we eventually can convince China, India, Africa, Latin America, Indonesia, all these countries that are going to be emitting most of the CO2 in the 21st century and who obviously are more concerned about lifting their populations out of poverty. So again, focus on the stuff that actually works. This is about finding innovations that will make green energy so cheap everyone will switch. That could be fourth generation nuclear. But the whole point is focus on those innovations rather than just making life miserable for rich people to feel good about yourself.
You noticed something at the recently concluded Davos confab that the EU Commission president did not talk climate change at all. Does that mean that the EU is ceasing to tilt at windmills, quite literally, or is it just she is subordinating that to more pressing issues given the sort of power structure in the West at present?
We would love that the EU was getting more realistic. They're getting a little more realistic, but I think it's much more a signpost of the way the wind is blowing. Remember, for 20 years, most of the rich world and the U.S., certainly under Democratic presidents, were basically saying climate change is the big problem that remains to the world. And now we've realized, oh, wait, there's a lot of other problems that need addressing. The affordability crisis, pension reform in many countries, war. We have the biggest land war in Europe, many other issues that are more pressing and that people more care about. And so, again, we're now getting people back to saying, oh, wait, there are actually real problems that we need to fix now, instead of focusing on doing a little bit on 100 years with climate change. And that's why Ursula von der Leyen, the EU commissioner, did not mention, for the first time, climate at all, because they're more important issues. What that tells you is, yes, focus on affordability, focus on actually getting returns for your investments. Unfortunately, I still think that the EU will go ahead and it's said as much, and it'll do a lot of stupid things, but probably slightly fewer stupid thing. So I guess that is a win of sorts.
Well, so that's what I was going to say. Is there any substantive shift in energy policy? I know out of necessity, Germany has made some modifications to its green energy delusions, but I'm wondering what, if anything, on a policy front is happening that shows
so
cognition.
There's more openness to nuclear power, which is great. It's stupid to cut back nuclear power plants you've already paid for and are essentially emitting no CO2 and delivering lots of CO2-free electricity at very, very low cost. That has just been stupid. Of course, Germany was leading that charge, but the U.S. and in New York and California has also been, canceling or talking about canceling these nuclear power plants. The idea of phasing out fossil fuel cars by 2035, which was previously a very strong part of the pillar of EU policy, is now gone. It's unclear exactly what it's going to be replaced with, but fundamentally, when a lot of people are still saying, I want a fossil fuel car, it's really hard for politicians to say you can't have one. And then in the longer run, there's a wonderful phrase that was incorporated. They talk about how they're going to do climate policy and they're going to do things that are going to be incredibly costly. But now they put in, if it turns out that it harms economic growth, we're going to revisit that. So very clearly, the EU leaders are going to revisit that. And that may turn out to be more sensible policies in the future. But yes, it still runs much of the continent. Although remember, EU citizens are much, much less concerned. Back in the spring of 2019, just before the COVID crisis, a third of all EU citizens put climate change as one of the two top priorities. Today, that number is down to 9%, less than 1 in 10. So we've at least moved towards less panic.
Well, that's okay. That's encouraging. I wanted to get your reaction to something that President Trump announced yesterday in his State of the Union address. He called it a ratepayer protection pledge because there's been an increase in electricity rates in America, more pronounced in some states like New Jersey than others, but still, and under the whole affordability construct, which I know is something that's particularly important to you, especially in the developing world. But the ratepayer protection pledge, he's executing with major tech companies, he said, requiring them to provide for their own power needs by building their own power plants and grids, essentially allowing private companies to do what government has done for decades. What do you think about that?
Well, look, it can be a good idea. A lot of people are very focused on how AI is going to use more electricity, and that is absolutely true. But it's not by any means the greatest part of what's going to increase electricity consumption around the world. It is probably bigger in the U.S., and so in that sense, it's a good idea to make them pay for their own electricity. And of course, when they have to pay for their own electricity, especially if they want power 24/7, they're going to go for nuclear or they're going to go for a lot of fossil fuels. And that sort of shows you what the rest of society should do. Look, solar power in California and 10-20% is great because it covers when you have air conditioning. But if you try to go all solar power, you get what Spain had, and you put your whole grid at risk. And there's a good chance that you're going to get a blackout sooner or later. So what you really need to do is to focus on affordability, and that is very much about having one system, not trying to duplicate it so you both have a renewable system and a fossil fuel-driven backup system, which of course makes your electricity much more expensive.
You penned an interesting piece in The Hill recently about foreign aid, after all the tumult and hand-wringing over USAID back in the Doge days last year. Yeah. In point of fact, America is still generous with respect to aid in the developing world, and the developing world is needing to learn to do more with less, and that's happening, you say.
Yes. So, fundamentally, I'm glad you saw that. It's fundamentally, people have this idea that the U.S. was spending enormous amounts. Typically, when you survey people, they think foreign aid is a quarter of the U.S. budget. It's nowhere anywhere near that. It's about 1%. Right. So, it's not a big amount. And look, you are the richest country in the world. You have demonstrated how good a society can be. I think most people really honestly believe that the U.S. also should give some of this back. But of course, you should do it well. And what we saw was there was a lot of silly programs at USAID. So it's a good thing that we got that cleaned up. But now we're also back to realizing but there are also a lot of really, really good things you can do. Take, for instance, vaccinations. A lot of children still need very basic childhood immunization against measles, against rotavirus, which kills 500,000 kids every year. There are so many things for very little money where you can do a lot of good. And that is what is now possible because of the new budget, which seems to indicate that that the U.S. is going to give almost as much as what it used to do, not quite as much, but almost as much. And now the real hard point is do all of these things incredibly effectively. So, do the immunization, focus on tuberculosis and malaria, which we know how to fix very cheaply. You can make the world much better. You can make many more people love America and say we're really thankful, but also make a more stable and safe world. Focus on education. We still have a world where about 1/3 of 1 billion kids are essentially, they're in school, but they're not really learning anything. We know how to do that by making a structured teacher plan, so make the teachers better at teaching and put the kids in front of a tablet with educational software 1 hour a day. These are very cheap things. It'll cost about $19 per kid per year. And they will teach these kids 2 to 3 times as effectively as what's happening right now. This is a way you can make the whole world much richer and, of course, also make countries that will want to trade and that will want to be part of your security alliances. So, again, very cheap. So we're talking about in total order of 1% of the U.S. budget. If you spend it well, you can do an amazing amount of good. So that's where we need to go back. Do this well. And, of course, that's exactly, I hope, what Rubio is focused on in doing the development spending through the State Department.
Right. And the important piece here, too, on the execution side is do it well. And that means doing it directly, not through, say, the WHO, which we pulled out of. Do it through vetted and proven partners, whether they're government or quasi-government agencies or NGOs that are affiliated with, the Western world. I mean, you got to make sure that you have people that can, essentially activate these resources to the desired ends, and that quality control was also something that was missing at USAID. We found.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's even more important that we focus on the things where you can do a lot of good rather than where you can do a little good, right? So remember, water and sanitation, really hard to do. You can still do some good, but it's just not the first place where you're going to spend money. Do it on education and tuberculosis. These things deliver enormous returns. We estimate, in the order of $50 back in every dollar. So you'll do $50 of good instead of for water and sanitation, $3 to $6. You can literally do 10 times as much good. So yes, it's absolutely important which organizations you work with, but it's much more important that you focus on what topics are you going to deal with, what topics are you going to solve first. And that, of course, also goes back to what we just talked about with climate. Yes, climate is also a problem, but it's just not the first problem for most people whose kids might die tonight or from easily curable infectious diseases or don't have enough food or have a terrible education. Those problems you can solve much cheaper, much more effectively, and make every dollar do a lot more good first.
Bjorn Lomberg is the president of the Copenhagen Consensus think tank, author of Best Things First. Bjorn, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Great to talk to you, Dan.
You too. And Bjorn Lomberg joined us on Chicago's Morning Answer.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
When someone you love is living with memories,